You know what the greatest compliment I ever received from anybody is? You know what it is? It's usually from 10 or 12-year-old kids. And the 10 or 12-year-olds come up to me and they say, Pastor Mark, I really like your messages. I understand everything you get, and I think your jokes are very funny. That's what they say. They think my jokes are funny. I don't care what you think about it. The 10-year-olds think they're good.
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
And when we think about the success or the failure of the church today, it's all about whether we are able or unable to build bridges to our community, to build bridges to our world that we're trying to reach. You know, when I hear pastors, and they say this often, they'll say, well, Pastor Mark, you don't understand. Our community is too hard. And I always like to say, and sometimes I say it, sometimes I just think it, I like to say, no, I remember the words of Jesus, and he said, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. You know what that means? It doesn't matter whether we win or lose a battle. We are on the winning team. We are going to win this initiative. We are on the right side of this equation. And what we need to do is we need to learn how to build those bridges to our community. Now, if you have found Joshua chapter 1, we're going to look at a familiar story here, starting at verse 1. It says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving them, the children of Israel. Every place in which your sole of your foot will tread, I have given to you, as I said to Moses. Jumping down to verse 10, which carries on in the story, it says, Then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, saying, Pass through the camp and command the people, saying, Prepare your provisions for yourselves, for within 3 days you will cross over this Jordan, to go up to possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess. And so here we have this mission of Joshua with the children of Israel to go across the Jordan River. Why did they need to go across that river? What was on the other side? What was the promised land, but specifically, it was their inheritance. Their inheritance was on the other side. Their destiny was on the other side. Their inheritance was not where they were. Their inheritance was on the other side of the river. It was where they were going to go. They could have stayed where they were, but they would have forfeited their inheritance. And in fact, two of the tribes, 2.5 actually, Gad and Reuben and half of Manasseh, wanted to stay. And what did Joshua think about that? He said, no, you are coming with us to fight for this land. Now, if you want to choose to come back, that's your business, but we're going to cross this river because our destiny is on the other hand, on the other side. It's sort of interesting because as you look through Scripture, you see this picture again and again. The people's destiny was on the other side. And it's fascinating that 2,000 years later, we have John the Baptist taking people to that same said river, right? It was the Jordan River. And he was taking people and baptizing them there to wash away their sins. Even Jesus himself came to be baptized in the Jordan River. And the Jordan River has come to symbolize what? Passing from the world that was into the world that's to come, or from your life of sin into a life of life, so to speak. And so we see that picture, that metaphor in Scripture, that really our inheritance is on the other side. And if we're really honest about our world in which we live in today, most people in our culture live on the other side of the river. And I'm talking spiritually, not literally. They live on the other side of the river of life. And we have got to cross over. We've got to get to the other side to bring them the gospel. Because in our world, our culture, Canada, North America, is no longer a Christian nation. You know how the East refers to us as the Christian West? Well, we used to be the Christian West. You know what we are now? We're the post-Christian West. 80% of Canadians will not be in church this morning. They will not be in church. They will be somewhere doing something else. They have become disconnected and far from God. And our job is to build a bridge to connect with those that are far from God. Now, here's where I need to give you a little caveat this morning. My message this morning is going to be unbiblical. Some of you are thinking, yeah, what else is new? tell us something we don't know. And I'll tell you why it's unbiblical. Because there are no bridges in Scripture. Not once. Not once is the word bridge even mentioned. It's amazing when you think about it. Now, they had bridges in those days. We know that. The oldest bridge in use in the world today is actually over 2,800 years old. It's in Turkey. It's still in use today. So it existed well before Christ. The oldest remnants of bridges are almost 3,000 years old. So we know there had to have been bridges in that time. For whatever reason, the Bible never mentions bridges or even the word bridge. But I want you to think about how they crossed water. How did they do it? Well, one way they did it was they did it in boats. Sometimes they even swam. But most of the time, what did they do? They just walked through it. I mean, they walked across the sea bottom of the Red Sea. The children of Israel that we're looking at here walked across the bottom of the Jordan River. Jesus did it even better. He just walked on the water, didn't he? You know, he had it all going on. I am not asking you to walk on water today. But what I am going to tell you is that we need to get to the other side. And we, in our culture, we like bridges. Do you know that most of you drive over a bridge every single day? That's because our city is full of rivers, right? I mean, we've got the Red River and the Assiniboine River, the Seine River, the LaSalle River, we've got Omans Creek. There's actually little streams of water all over our city, and there's bridges built across them. And we drive across those bridges, and we never even give it a second thought. I want you to think for a minute, because you may need to think about this, because you're so used to it, you take it for granted. How many of you drive across a bridge every single day to get to work? How many of you drive across a bridge? Let me see your hands. Well, a lot of you drive across a bridge. Why? Why do you cross that bridge? To get to the other side? Yeah. That would be correct, actually. You drive across the bridge because your financial destiny is on the other side, right? You can't phone your boss and say, I can't come to work. The Assiniboine's in the way. You know, they're not going to buy that, right? We have to realize that we go across these bridges all the time, and these bridges have become part of life. But what's happened in our culture concerning the gospel and spiritual things is these bridges, or these gaps, I'm going to call them, they exist all over the place, and sometimes we don't think about them. They're ethnic gaps and generational gaps, and they're cultural gaps, and they're religious gaps, and they're spiritual gaps. And people are separated by these gaps, and it's our job to build a bridge for the gospel to get to them, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I want to show you a picture of a bridge. This is called the Cholula Bridge, and it's in Honduras. I want you to look at that picture because there's something just a wee bit odd about that bridge. And let me tell you the story behind this bridge. Now, the city of Cholula, Honduras has had a bridge there over the Cholula River for years and years. And the problem was that hurricanes kept on hitting Honduras and wiping out the bridge. So the U.S. Corps of Engineers did them a huge favor, and they came to Honduras and they built them a bridge that could withstand a Category 5 hurricane. 1998, they got hit by Hurricane Mitch, Category 5 hurricane. It killed 5,600 people. It put 12,300 people in the hospital. And the good news is the bridge survived. But as you look at that picture, there's something a little bit peculiar about that bridge. And what do you think happened? The bridge stood, but the river moved. And you see what happens, when I look at that picture, it makes me think of the church today. Because what happens is we build these institutions. We build these churches that we think are going to last for generations to come. And in a way they do. The institution lasts, the building lasts, but the culture moves. The river moves on us, and we're no longer reaching the people that we first intended to reach. And so what I want to talk about this morning is I want to talk about how do we build bridges to the ethnic and cultural and religious and the different groups of people, the different generations. How do we build those bridges? And I could talk about what each one of these gaps are, but I think you understand that there are gaps between ethnicities, and there's gaps between generations, and there's gaps between modern and old culture and church culture and pop culture. I think you understand that those gaps exist. The bigger question for me is how do we build bridges to engage our world? And I'm going to give you three things, and the first one is this. The first way we build bridges to our culture is we begin to speak their language. Now, let me ask a question here. I think you'll all get this. If you were a missionary and you were sent to a foreign country, what would be the very first thing you would do? You would learn the language. Why? Because they're not going to understand you if you go speaking English, right? You can think, oh, I'm a missionary and I'm going to this country and I'm going to speak English, but that's not going to work because they're not going to understand what you're talking about. So that's going to be the first thing you're going to do, is you're going to learn the language. The second thing you're going to do, and you've probably never thought about this one, the second thing you're going to do is you're going to study their culture. And you're going to try to seek to discover what the redemptive analogies are within their culture that you can use to communicate the gospel in a way that they can understand. I want you to think about that in terms of Jesus. When Jesus came in his incarnational form, when he came and lived and dwelt among us on the earth, the first thing he did was he learned their language. You say, what are you talking about? He did. He was a baby. He had to learn how to talk. And he learned their language. And he spoke the language of the day, which incidentally was the language of Aramaic. And Jesus spoke Aramaic. He preached in Aramaic. He did not come speaking the heavenly language. Some of you are saying, what's the heavenly language? That'd be Low German, wouldn't it? For some of you. And so Jesus came speaking Aramaic, the language that his people and that his culture spoke. But the second thing he did was he learned the cultural nuances and the analogies of his culture so he could use those things to explain spiritual things in ways that they would understand. You say, what are you talking about? I'm talking about his parables. Most of his preaching was in parables. What is a parable? A parable is an illustration. It's an analogy. It's a metaphor. And he used the metaphors from his culture, which was an agricultural society, fishing and farming. So, consequently, his parables were about what? They were about fish and sheep and goats and seeds and vineyards and fig trees. Why did he choose those things? Because they're spiritual? No, because they were cultural. Those were the things that his people understood. 2,000 years separated from Jesus, those things aren't very relevant to us anymore. We have trouble understanding sheep and goats because there's probably not a single goat or sheep herder in this entire room. So here's my question to you, and I want you to think about this, because it might seem a bit sacrilegious to you, but I don't think it is. If Jesus was to come and was to be born in Winnipeg, actually I guess he'd be born in Headingley, just next door, and if he was to come and be born here and lived in our society, and he was to come to us today, he would speak our language. He'd probably speak English. And secondly, what metaphors, what parallels and illustrations would he use? He'd probably use technology, because that's what people talk today. They talk about technology. He'd probably use sports. I'm thinking hockey in particular. What do you think? And he'd probably engage pop culture, because people today speak pop culture. Do they not? People talk about pop culture. People understand this. And so I know you have trouble with that, but who knows anything about sheep and goats today? We don't know anything about that. And I think if Jesus was here today, he'd have to engage different metaphors, just like missionaries, when they go to other countries that don't know anything about sheep and goats, they don't talk about sheep and goats. They talk about things that relate to that particular culture. Now, I'm going to tell you something that may not be a big surprise to you. One of the biggest criticisms that I get, apart from my jokes, is about my use of pop culture. Because I'm always engaging pop culture, I'm always using pop cultural references, and people don't always like that. They think that I'm becoming worldly in doing that. And I understand that out of context, it sometimes looks goofy. I will admit that even sometimes I look at what I do and I think, you're an idiot. I understand that. I mean, I have on occasions, you've probably noticed this, I have showed up as a pirate. And I have preached as a pirate. You've all seen me do that. I have showed up dressed like Michael Jackson. And I have preached as Michael Jackson. I have showed up and preached as Superman. Now for me, for the record, those abs are real. That's not part of the costume. Told you that before. And just so you know, folks, for me, that was a dream come true. Preaching in a Superman costume. For my wife, Kathy, it was a nightmare. She says, why do you want to wear that red diaper? That's what she thought that looked like. And so I understand that out of context, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You know, why is someone, dressed like that? Why is someone preaching like that? This year I really got slammed because I came dressed like Obi-Wan Kenobi, or as I like to call him, only one cannoli. And this was up on a website. There was a website that is dedicated to bashing Christians who do unusual things. And I was their main target over the spring. And this was one of their things they posted. Pop quiz. This man is A, a Jedi, B, a Disney cast member, or C, a seeker-driven pastor. There was hundreds of responses to this, which they added new letters. D, a goat herder. E, the Antichrist himself. And so it went on and on. And I understand a guy standing there preaching, dressed as a Jedi with the Death Star behind him instead of a cross, looks a little strange, out of context. But if you put it into the context of what we were trying to do, using one of our cultural metaphors to try to communicate the gospel to people, it actually makes more sense than it does when you just see a picture up like that. I know I've convinced probably half of you. That's good. You know what the greatest compliment I ever received from anybody is? You know what it is? It's usually from 10 or 12-year-old kids. And the 10 or 12-year-olds come up to me and they say, Pastor Mark, I really like your messages. I understand everything you get, and I think your jokes are very funny. That's what they say. They think my jokes are funny. I don't care what you think about it. The 10-year-olds think they're good. And you know why they understand what I say? Because I speak at a grade 5 level. That's why. That's my sweet spot. That's my target audience, the 10 or 12-year-olds. If you're getting something out of it, good for you, but you're not my target. I'm going for that, 11-year-old sweet spot, and they get it. But I want you to understand that the success of the church has actually always been along those lines of connecting with people in the language and the culture in which they live. And if we can begin to learn their language and begin to learn their culture and begin to engage them at that level, guess what? We can actually communicate the gospel in an effective way. How many of you have ever seen or heard a Salvation Army band? Salvation Army band, they're terrific, aren't they? The brass bands, the brass instruments, and the uniforms. And they look fantastic. They sound fantastic. But if we're honest, they're a bit of an anachronism, right? They're a bit out of a different era. But at the time, and you probably don't know this about the Salvation Army, when General William Booth founded the Salvation Army, he realized that they weren't going to reach the people, and they literally went down the streets trying to reach people with the gospel. And he realized that the hymns of his day were not going to cut it because they did not engage his culture. So what he did was he used brass bands doing the tavern songs from the bars of his day. That's what that music is today. Now, today it seems like it's old-fashioned, but in his day, he was on the cutting edge. And that's how we build bridges to our culture, to begin to connect with them on the level in which they speak and the level in which they live. And there's all kinds of churches doing a very effective job of this, and some of you would never go to these churches, and some of you might even criticize these churches, but I look at what they're doing, and I get it, and I applaud it. For example, the Nashville Cowboy Church. What kind of people do you think go to the Nashville Cowboy Church? You know what? In Nashville, this works. See the guy on the left? That's the pastor of the Nashville Cowboy Church. Everybody at the Nashville Cowboy Church wears a cowboy hat. And you know what? We do it once a year here on our pie auction, but they can do it every day because they live in Nashville. Take a stab at it. They do two kinds of music. Guess what kind of music they do? Yeah, both country and Western is what they do. There is an Anglican priest. You're going to love this one. I don't know the actual name of his church, so I'm going to call it the Elvis Anglican Church. And the Anglican priest is an Elvis impersonator. And he does Elvis songs in his Anglican pulpit. I'm digging this. I would not go, but I'd love that jumpsuit if there was some way that I could get into that. There is a church in Harlem called the Harlem Hip Hop Church. What kind of music do you think the Harlem Hip Hop Church is doing? They're stomping it. They are stomping it in Harlem, and guess what? It works because that's who their culture is. There's many biker churches around the world. You probably know that. This one is called the Freedom Bikers Church. My question is this. Do you see any minivans in that parking lot? There's no minivans in that parking lot because this is a biker's church and this is where bikers go. And I want you to know that once they get inside that building, they're doing this stuff. They are loving each other and they're loving Jesus and they're worshiping God and it's working for them. It might not work for you. It might not work for me. Well, I know it's not going to work for me because they're not going to like my jokes. You know my one, right? Yeah, what's the difference between a Hoover and a Harley? One's got the dirt bag in the inside, the other one's got the dirt bag in the outside. I wouldn't even repeat that joke, let alone tell it. Actually, I might risk it, you know, because they're Christian bikers, they're going to have to forgive me, right? So I might be okay. So the first thing that I don't want to miss about this, how do we build bridges to our culture? We need to learn to speak their language. The second thing is we need to meet their felt needs. Now, we can always say that their real needs are spiritual needs, and what they really need is the gospel. I wouldn't argue with that. But that's not their felt need. Their felt needs have to do with a whole lot of other things. And it's hard to reach people with the gospel if you're not going to meet their felt needs. It was St. Francis of Assisi who said this. He said, by all means, preach the gospel always, and if necessary, finish it for me, use words. He says, if necessary, use words. And what he's talking about is he's talking about communicating the gospel with good works, demonstrating the gospel. See, we're fond in evangelical circles, we're fond of proclaiming the gospel and not as fond of demonstrating it. But the gospel is really more effective when it comes in word and in deed. When it is not only proclaimed, but it is also demonstrated. And when you look at the model of Jesus, that's exactly what he did. It said Jesus of Nazareth was anointed of the Holy Spirit, who went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed of the devil. I want you to think about this. Jesus' calling card was good works, right? Everywhere he went, he did good works. If they were broken, he mended them. If they were sick, he healed them. It didn't matter what their felt need was. He met their felt need. And he brought them up and brought healing and brought life and brought acceptance to them. And here's the thing I don't want you to miss. He told us to do the same thing. He said, you are the light of the world. We like that part of the verse. Don't stop there, because then what he did was he explained what it is to be the light of the world. He said, so let your light shine that people would see your good works and glorify God. So what is the light of the world? Good works. It's doing good works. Jesus actually took it a step further. He talked in one of his parables about sheep and goats. There's that agricultural thing again. And he said, you know, there's going to come a day where I'm going to gather everybody together and I'm going to separate the sheep from the goats. And the sheep are going to go on the right side and the goats are going to go on the left side. And he says, this is the difference between a sheep and a goat. And I'll give you the context or the core of the story. He said this. He said, when I was naked, you clothed me. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. When I was sick, you visited me. When I was in prison, you came to me. And the sheep will say, when did we do these things? And he will say, as you have done to the least of these, you've done it to me. And the goats will say, when did we not do these things? And he'll say, as you did not do to the least of these, you failed to do it to me. Mother Teresa once said this, that Jesus comes to us in the distressing guise of the poorest of poor. And Jesus told us that as we do it to others, that good works were the nature of the gospel. And if we think that we can merely proclaim the gospel without demonstrating it, we have misunderstood what his command is. You know, the Salvation Army, for one group, has always understood this. They said, how can you speak to someone about their spiritual need if they've got an empty belly, no clothes on their back, or no roof on their head? And so they have always endeavored to first meet the spiritual, or the physical needs rather, and then to meet the spiritual need. Because their felt need is the thing that is most critical to them. Let me tell you a little story that happened to me a few years ago. I was invited to speak at a pastor's conference. It was a whole group of pastors from Western Canada, and the conference was in Winnipeg. I was the keynote speaker, and they did something that I've never seen any pastors group do before. They held it at the Salvation Army Booth Center. The Booth Center is the homeless shelter on the corner of Higgins and Main downtown. And they held it right in the chapel there, and for 3 days we were there, and my job was to speak to them about loving their neighbor. So I can talk about that. That's a good topic. I can talk to pastors about that. But one thing I wasn't expecting was this. Because it was in the homeless shelter, they invited any of the people in the homeless shelter to join us. And so I was speaking to the most diverse group I've ever spoken to in my life. It was pastors and homeless people and nobody in between. That's a big shot between these two people. I'll be honest with you, it was a little bit intimidating. But anyway, I went for it. For 3 days, I spoke about loving the poor and loving our neighbor and reaching our community. And the pastors listened and cheered, and the homeless listened, didn't cheer, they slept, they did other stuff. But anyway, at the end of 3 days, one of these women who had been there every single day, She came up to me on the very last day, and she said, Pastor Mark, I appreciate what you said today, but she says, if you really want to put your money where your mouth is, why don't you stay here and get a bed for the weekend and spend the weekend with us? And I went, yeah, that's what I was thinking of doing. No, I wasn't thinking. Even while we were there, the pastors were going to the hotel, Hotel Fort Garry, down the street. I was going home and sleeping in my bed. The homeless people were staying in the shelter. Now, it's not a horrible place at all. It's actually a very nice and very clean place and very well maintained. But I hadn't thought about spending the weekend in the homeless shelter. And what I didn't want to tell this lady was the reason I couldn't stay that night was I had tickets to the Bomber game on the 45-yard line that night. And so I had to weigh this out. Bombers game, homeless shelter. Bombers game, homeless shelter. Bombers game, homeless shelter. What do you think I did? Don't look at me like so shame on you. Of course I went to the Bombers game. And so would you. Don't give me that. Looking at me so sanctimonious. Oh, shame. You should have stayed at the homeless center. You know, I suppose I could have stayed, and you know what I would have done? I would have checked it off the bucket list. Spent night in homeless shelter. That's not the point. The point is learning how to truly engage people where they live. Because let me explain something to you. Yes, there are homeless people, but they're not the only people with felt needs, right? Those needs are just a little more obvious. They need food, they need clothing, they need homes. But you know what? Every person you know has felt needs. And it has to do with their relationships. It has to do with their emotions. It has to do with their life and their struggles and their thoughts and their psychology. And every person you know has some sort of desperate felt need that they don't know that the answer is a spiritual need. And what we can do is we can come in and be a friend. We can be support. We can love them. We can encourage them. There's all kinds of things we can do. And that's really what it was about. Because what Jesus did was when he came from heaven to earth, and we call it incarnational ministry. And what that means was the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Jesus became flesh and dwelt among us. He came and lived amongst the people he was trying to reach. And it wasn't just the poor. It wasn't just the sick. It wasn't just the broken. It was everybody. And he got accused of something. You remember they called him a friend of sinners. Do you know why they called Jesus a friend of sinners? Because he was a friend of sinners. It's not a trick question. He got in with them. He rolled up his sleeves and he connected with them and he loved these people that he was trying to reach. Which brings me to my last point here, and that's to love unconditionally. We need to speak their language. We need to meet their felt needs, but then we need to love them unconditionally. Jesus always loved people unconditionally. Whenever he healed people, did he say, well, if you will receive me as your Savior, I'll heal you? Did he ever do that? Never did that. Who did he heal? Everybody. No strings attached. Jesus did good works with no strings attached. In fact, even after he healed them, then he didn't demand them to follow him. He'd sometimes warn them and say, go your way and sin no more, lest the worst thing come upon you. But he never said, follow me or you're going straight to hell. He didn't say that. What he did was he did good works with no strings attached. That was his calling card, good works. But what inevitably happened is that people finally came around and asked them the question, what must I do to be saved? Because ultimately that's their real need. And they'll get to it if you give them a chance. But we can't just jump from good works to good news. How do we build bridges to our world? We, first of all, speak their language, we meet their felt needs, and we love them unconditionally. Whether they come to Christ or not is not the issue. What we do is we do good works to build goodwill, and the goodwill may eventually give us the opportunity to share the good news.
Church of the Rock has services every Sunday at 1397 Buffalo Place, and we invite you to join us when you're in the Winnipeg area. If you'd like a booklet to help you understand more about God's gift of forgiveness and reconciliation through Jesus Christ, please contact us, and we'd be happy to send you a free copy of the Book of Hope. Visit our website at www.churchoftherock.ca. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.